You're listening to the Tribecast at tribejournal.org. Okay, welcome to the Tribecast. We have a deep dive today with Akiva Bigman from mida.org.il. That's mida.org.il. He is an investigative journalist in Israel who has been writing for decades on the housing, primarily policy. Tell us a little bit about what you've been writing about and reporting before we dive in.
Yeah, so hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. So, as you said, I'm an investigative journalist in Israel. We established Mida 2012. It's been a while ago. And I worked for other outlets. I worked for Israel Hayom, for Channel 14. And my main interest is policy issues, mostly policy issues that regard the strength of Israel as a country and maybe, just broadly, like Zionism. So I deal a lot with the IDF, with the way we wage wars, the way we built the IDF, the way the IDF operates. I wrote a lot about stuff like this throughout the war, and I deal a lot with the land policy and settlement policy, mostly in the 48 boundaries, not Yehuda v'Shomron, which is, like basic classic Zionism, 101. Like should be like the fundamentals. So I've been doing a lot with that in the Galilee and the Negev, also the Jewish side of the settlement policy, also the Arab and the Bedouin side of that. I myself live in the Negev. I moved here almost like 15 years ago. So I live in the Negev, real close to a huge Bedouin, I don't know how to call it. It's not a compound. It's not a town. It's not a settlement. It's like a thing. That's just the way their life is organized. It's not organized in any way we can like understand in the modern idea of townships and cities, but it's a pretty big Bedouin tribe, we'll say.
Meaning they migrate from place to place and technically don't own any land. They just live on the land and travel around the various parts of the desert.
Yeah, so they haven't been traveling for like a long time already, maybe more than 100 years. They don't really travel, but they don't settle in like modern cities too much. This maybe should be a different podcast.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
whole Bedouin issue. It's very complicated. But I was just mentioning this because that's my like day-to-day life. I see this. I know the people, that's my route, the road everywhere I go. So it's not only like a theoretical issue, a thing you deal with, you talk to people, you read about. It's like the things I actually see every day. So that's about me. And I live in a young Jewish settlement or a yishuv, you can call village maybe. So that's also this experience of being part of this new kind of village and the hardships that we had to go through to do what we're doing here. So I live like this issue. That's what I'm trying to say here. So I like know a lot about this also from my personal.
So this wasn't just a hobby. This wasn't necessarily your professional choice. It's more of it got personal when you moved to the communities in the Negev and found yourself pretty much, I guess, all alone and surrounded by Bedouins and whatnot, and trying to figure out how to grow the Negev. Is that an accurate summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Definitely.
Okay, great.
I'm not doing this for my personal gain because it's crucial policy issues. Personally, like I'm fine. I have a house, I'm okay. But that there are crucial issues here dealing with, national strategy and.
Absolutely. And I think for every Israeli, it's become personal as well because the housing costs have gone up. Everyone's talking about the North and the South. It's this black box that we would love to unpack and figure out like what is going on there. We don't want to end up on a border without support from the government and from the IDF and et cetera, et cetera. And also there's, you don't want to be the only small little community out there. You want to see growth and a commitment to growth by the authorities. So we're hoping today and in future episodes, if you'll join us again, to unpack a lot of the policy bottlenecks and just how does it work? We have mavens and we have the novice as well, tuning in to really understand this. I know in my circles, a lot of people are discussing both Yosh, which is a different chapter for another time, but also the North and the South. There are a lot of new communities springing up over there and, or I should say, adding on to, expanding, I should say, right? And so today what we want to get into is a little bit about the announcements that recently hit Tel Arad and other communities in the Negev, also up north. There was just an announcement by the Prime Minister and others, a big hoopla about universities in the top northern border with Lebanon and Syria, and other expansions in the communities and resources being deployed there. to help the communities recover and grow. And so you have an interesting article. I'm just going to reference this to our listeners about the procedure for making a decision on the establishment of new settlements. The Attorney General, anyone wants to Google it, the Attorney General's Directive number 1.1800. So we'd love to get into that and how the discrepancy between the government and the policy the makers and the government. The government, when we refer to that, we're talking about the elected representatives in the Knesset and different committees associated with that. And then there's the policymakers, the people who are the quote unquote expert institutional policy deciders, we'll even say, and a little foreshadowing language there on where we're going. First, let's take a quick look at how you and I got started and a little back and forth offline. We're going to add this to the screen afterwards, but here's a picture of Tel Arad. You can see it was a recent announcement that this small community just moved out there. And this really piqued my interest because I said, why is it, it always bothered me driving down anywhere in Yosh or, Yehuda V'Shomron, aka the West Bank, or the south or the north. When you're driving there, there's just expansive land. There's land everywhere. And it's just mind-boggling that, everyone's piling into these apartment buildings all over Israel. And then you see this groundbreaking, pun not intended, community in the Negev, Tel Arad. And it's literally 20 to 30 caravans all bundled up together. I'm like, wait a sec, guys, we're missing something. Isn't the idea that we should be, spreading out a little bit, the beautiful suburbs, why are these people starting their community already with the raw, they didn't get the message that people want a little bit more expansive space instead of building up or on top of each other. Maybe you can we'll jump off from here and use this as a starting point for our discussion today. Why do people do that? Why do these communities start with these, very condensed communities when they have so much land surrounding them?
Yeah, so I think maybe there's also 3 layers of an answer to this. First of all, I mean, my family is American. We made Aliyah when I was a small kid. So I kind of know how people live in American suburbs. And the difference, there's a cultural issue here that I can't explain otherwise. Israelis like to be close to each other. I just don't, there's no other explanation. You go to American suburbs, there's a house here, then the neighbor is I don't know, 100 meters away or whatever, maybe even farther. And if you go farther than the suburbs, you go upstate and stuff like that. The neighbor is someone you have to drive 15 minutes to get to. I mean, they spread all over the place, big ranches, stuff like that. Israelis don't like to live like that. It's not my field of expertise to explain that. But even the settlements, villages, the kibbutzim, everything that was established before the state of Israel even exists, in the pre-Zionist era, things were more condensed. I just don't know how to explain it. Maybe, it's the Jewish idea of community. You want to be close to each other. For religious people, as myself, you don't want to be too far away from the Beit Knesset, so you can walk there on Shabbat. So, it makes some kind of sense. You don't want to live in a ranch, Dakota or something like that. So there is an issue that at the end of the day, the planning and the culture in Israel, people like to be more close to each other. So you get these smaller communities, smaller, closer houses, even places where they have bigger lots of land, there will be rectangles. They'll be narrow and long, and then the houses will be close. And they'll have the land going far away, but the houses will be close. So that has to do with that. Some of it has to do with infrastructure. If the houses are closer, so it's easier to bring infrastructure, it's more efficient. And when the government does the planning, and here we're going into the second and third layers of this, when the government does the central planning of all these issues, so the efficiency of infrastructure is very important for the government. Well, maybe if you were as a private citizen and building your own infrastructure, you might want to be farther away. You might want to have a lot of land, etc. When it's all centralized and run by this agenda from Jerusalem and not from the field, so that's also part of this issue. A second thing we need to talk about is general policy in Israel as far as land allocations. And it's run in Israel, I guess people already heard this from other people, but most of the land, 90-something% of the land in Israel is owned by the state of Israel. It's not privately owned. You have some private owned land. People bought lots of land, in the end of the 19th century or, the 20s or something like that. Before the establishment of the states, or some places were privately owned. Some people bought like land, this Keren Kayemet stuff, whatever. People bought land and they had marshland in the middle of nowhere. And then, 100 years later, it's worth like millions. So you have these cases. Like Ra'anana is a good example. And some of the Arab villages, they have some private owned land also because they've been here since the Ottoman era and stuff like that. So they had like land, they filed the forms or whatever they had to do when this was possible. But most of the land is state land. It's owned by the government, which I think is like really the opposite from what people know in the United States or other places. So it's owned by the government and it's managed by the government. It's a central. It's called Rishut Mekarkei Israel. That will be like the authority of Israel's land or Israel Land Authority, something like that. That will be the translation. And everything, because the government owns the land, so everything that has to do with planning goes through the government. That's just the way it is. It's not only like municipal, rules or regulations that you have in other places. Also, that's like the United States. So there's always regulations, right? How to build your house, how the road needs to look. There's municipal rules and whatever. But it's more than regulations. It's not regulations on how you manage your private property. It's the opposite. It's the government's property, and the regulations are what you're allowed to do with our property. It's like really upside down. So when you get to planning, so let's say like the first question is how big a lot you can buy and build a house on. You don't get to decide. The government will say, okay, this is the area where we will be building buildings or houses or a village. And this will be the size of the lots. And they're usually pretty small. And you can buy only one and you can build one house on that lot. You cannot like say, okay, I'll buy 3 of them and combine. It just doesn't work. It's not a possibility even. Okay. It's not even like a felony. You can do it and then go to jail. You just can't do it. It won't happen. It's that centralized. Okay. And then the government
that dates back to Herzl, for those who haven't read the book. But basically, his whole idea, the whole sort of ideation of the state of Israel was that everyone in Europe would sell their land to this Jewish organization, which would then invest it in the Holy Land and then allocate houses to people. I think they got the first part right with all the donations, but I think they forgot to allocate it to the people.
Right. Right, exactly. And this has to do with the history of Israel. Israel is very socialist and centralized, from the establishment, all these feuds inside the Zionist movement. That's history, but that's the background for all of this. The American Zionist organization in the beginning was more free market oriented, and they had these arguments, and they ended up kicking out Louis Brandeis from the movement because of this. So there is a serious background to this, like ideologically and policy-wise, going way back to the beginning. Really, it's that may be for a different episode. It's very interesting.
Right, but I think the
Israel was
contrast
very
for the American
socialist.
audience, I think there is it's important to contrast that. Whereas if you have a community like Lakewood, New Jersey, and Lakewood, New Jersey is expanding, then someone could just go buy the house next door. Here in a neighboring city or a township, et cetera, here, if a person wants to build a house, to find land to build on it's restricted, et cetera, and it's very much controlled by the government, like you're saying.
Right. So, and then the government, they're very into small lots. Okay. Most of the lots of like private houses, or villas, what people call in Israel, which are hardly villas at all. But most of the lots, there will be 500 square meters. That will be like a chetzi dunam. That's what it's called. That will be like most of them. There's some, you have an emotion.
For the Anglos for the Americans out there, it's about 1/8 of an acre.
Yeah. Okay. Some of the moshavim, which are more like agricultural towns, like farms, so they'll have like maybe a 5 dunam lot, but the 5 dunam, it's like 1 dunam for living and like 4 dunam for livestock or for agricultural stuff. So it's not like really for housing. And what's happening these days is that they're getting the lots even smaller. So like a few years ago, they were talking about like only 400 square meters, which is even less than the eighth of whatever. And now we're hearing people talking about only like 350 square meters. So, it's not much. It's basically, it's enough to build like a house, and you have a place to park your car, and maybe like a small strip of land like around your house, or maybe it's like really, very, very, very small. It's like, it has nothing to do with like, American suburbs at all. It's like maybe half the size of what people are used to. And those kinds of places. It's very,
Especially
very
in the urban areas. I mean, they're what, Beit Shemesh, for example, started out as a small houses and small buildings, and now they're building literally towers,
yeah. So
residential.
that's different. I'm talking about like the village side, right? Of
Right. I
course,
mean, you're talking about the moshavim out in, or see them in the
right, right.
peripheral.
We're talking. We'll talk today mostly about like
Peripheral.
what's called hitiyashvut kafrit. It's the village kind of settlement in Israel. So it's
Great.
mostly like peripheria, north, south, and stuff like that. So what happens is they're very into like small lots. So it makes the settlements even more condensed. So that's just to answer the question we started from. And now like the third layer of answer, which I think is what we wanted to discuss today, is that this photo you just saw, we just saw, that's not a photo of the actual yishuv, of the actual village or settlement that will be established. And this brings us into the real crazy system that we live in. What happened in Tel Arad is that they didn't establish any yishuv yet, actually. Nothing happened yet, formally, legally, in Tel Arad. What happened is because the elected government, and you said correctly, there's a difference between uh, inside the governmental branch, right? There's a difference between the elected government, right, and the unelected bureaucracy, which actually runs the government. So, and everybody talks about it in different aspects. When it comes to politics, they talk about the deep state. That's like really hot today. So, talking about deep state, usually with the prosecution of public officials, and politics and stuff like that. So that's what we're used to talking about, this kind of schism in the system, right? But when it comes to policymaking, it happens a lot, and especially in this issue. So what happened is that the elected officials of the Israeli government, this right-wing government, obviously Zionist government, the pro Hittish, pro settlement, pro everything, they really want to establish new settlements in Israel because that's like the right thing to do. But the bureaucracy is built and designed in a way that's just impossible, literally impossible for a government, elected government, to make this kind of policy. It's
Okay,
easier
just to
for the government
clarify,
of Israel to declare war. It's easier for Netanyahu to decide we're going to take our fighters and fly 1,000 kilometers to Iran and bomb Iran and start a war. It's easier for him to make this decision than to build a new settlement in Israel, the 1948 boundaries of Israel. It's easier for him to do that.
just to clarify, because this is a really important point. We're not talking about Yehuda Shomron. We're not talking about the quote unquote disputed territories. If you go to the Israeli website, the government website, it says those are the disputed territories, and these are the quote unquote undisputed territories. So we're talking about the north and the south within the 48 borders. And so you're saying even in those areas, because sometimes the word settlement can be misleading a little bit, or people have different associations with the settlement movement, etc. Here you're just talking about literally protecting the northern and the southern borders with civilians.
Right. Just classic Zionism. Maybe we should use the word villages so we don't get confused. Also settlements used to be a used word to use for everybody. But yeah, we'll talk about villages. So yeah, we're talking about this, which is
I think we should stick with settlements. I don't know why we should distinguish between. No, really. I mean,
yeah, okay, just
they're
for the
both.
listeners, so people don't get confused. So we're
Yeah.
talking about that. So, yeah. So whatever you call those places where people live inside 1948 boundaries, which should be like a consensus, basic Zionist consensus. There should not be any problem. And they say we should take people out of the settlements in Judea and Samaria so we can strengthen the Jewish settlements in the other parts of the country. But then you can't do it. So it's like the whole thing
Tell
is
us more about that, Akiva. Let's
crazy. So yeah, I want to dig into
double
that.
click on that and try and understand where's the bottleneck? How is the policy preventing governmentally elected officials, elected government members of the Knesset and the committees from actually getting things done?
Yeah. So before we go into how, I want to give you maybe more of like a general view of what is actually happening. Because so what happened in Tel Arad is that the official government, the elected government, the ministers, they want to establish a settlement in Tel Arad. Tel Arad is like North Negev. Okay, next to the close to the Dead Sea area. I would say it's not really next to it, but for general orientation. They want to establish a settlement there. So what they're doing something that they do sometimes in Judea and Samaria. They're saying, okay, the system is against us. It's impossible to do this through the bureaucracy. What we can do, we can have like a temporary community living on the land nearby the place where it's supposed to be living at the end of when this actually happens. But they will be living on the land. There'll be facts on the ground. There'll be people living there, and then this will be a leverage on the planning and and institutions of the bureaucracy. Because there's people there, there's families, there's kids. So it's supposed to like help push the bureaucracy. So this is how bad it gets. You can't decide as the official elected government to do this. You have to do all these levers on the bureaucracy. There's another place like this in the Galil. It's called Ramat Arbel. It's like in the middle of the central Galil. And they have this some kind of temporary settlement community living there for a few years already, but they cannot get the official formal approval to build a real settlement there. It's not happening. So just to finish the question about why they're condensed, and then we'll go into the policy issues. The reason why the photo of Tel Arad is condensed like that is because this is actually not it's not even the real thing. It's not the real settlement. It's not the real issue. When they will establish a real issue, it will also be condensed. And that's what we talked about in the beginning. But this is a temporary thing with these mobile homes, these caravans, young families, usually, one or two kids, small kids. It's like the whole thing is just, it's like a leverage thing more than the actual settlement act. So this is really to explain this photo we saw. Now let's dive into the actual policy about establishing new settlements in Israel and what happened. So I wrote this piece in the Midah. It's been like half a year ago, a little bit more, actually, almost a year ago. And I went through decisions of the governments of Israel throughout the last 30 years where they decided they want to establish new settlements in Eretz Israel. Okay? That's like classic Zionism. I mean, nothing is less Zionist than that. Just just establish settlements. They wanted to do this. All the governments, right wing, left wing, whatever. Even the Bennett government that had Arabs on the government, and everybody is upset at them. They also wanted to establish new settlements in Israel. That's it's really the fundamentals. Okay. So I counted more than 30 of those. If the government decisions were happening, we'd have 30 new settlements in Israel in the last 30 years. But what happens is we have zero. None of them actually became a reality. I could just have the whole list on the website. I'm not going to go through the whole list.
Why is that?
Yeah, we'll go into why is that. Just like a general, just to understand what's happening. Some of these places were in the Negev, deep Negev. Some were like around the Gaza Strip. Some were talking about Galil. There's 2 settlements or maybe even towns that were supposed to be established in the Golan Heights with 2,000 families each, it's big. It's a huge difference for the Golan. It never happened. They're always talking about 5 settlements in Arad and 15 settlements here and there, and none of this happened, including one that's kind of astounding. They wanted to establish a new township between like Sderot and Gaza, and in that area, like the northern Gaza Strip. They wanted to establish a Israeli settlement and call it Hanun, and it's supposed to be next door to the Gazan neighborhood of Bet Hanun, where they're firing missiles on our people all the time. This is like very, very relevant to do this. And also, the government decided they want to establish this settlement. It never happened. So it's just crazy. It's all over the place, all of the time. You have some of these like decisions made already in 2002, and they never got fulfilled. Like Ramat Arbel I mentioned is from 2002. We're talking about the Arad settlements. That's from 2011. So just to get the idea of how long this stuff are stuck in the system. Now, what happened is that
these would be approved by the government, and then the bureaucracy would kick in and just block everything and not allow it to progress to actual residents moving in.
Right. Exactly. While in the past, it was enough for the government to just decide, because there's something something we need to understand. Building settlements, there's a lot of professional issues regarding building a new settlement. Okay, and also just building new neighborhoods and existing settlements. Nobody's against that. You have a town, a city, Petah Tikva, Tel Aviv. You want to build a new in Bet Shemesh, where you live. You want to build a new neighborhood, so it's not something. You do offhand. It's a serious issue. So you bring in engineers and you want to see what's going on with the land. You want to see if there's, I don't know, natural, stuff. Maybe there's an important species of some insect who lives there. I don't know. Maybe there's archaeology. The stuff you need to check. I get that. Everybody gets that. You don't just come on and bulldoze everything and build houses. That's true. But there is a national policy aspect of this that should be above all, or should be guiding the whole system. We want to have more Jews living in certain areas. This is our policy. This is our national interest. Okay. Now we need to check. Okay, let's see if there's this special kind of mouse that lives there, and we can figure out what to do with it. Okay, maybe we can move them. Maybe we can. I don't know. Maybe there's mice other places, and that's okay. We figure there's the problems we can solve. What to do with water, what to do with roads. Everything is important. What happened is that they kind of flipped the pyramid on its head. And what they said is the professional echelon, the ones that have to answer all these questions that actually supposed to answer the question of how to promote or to fulfill the government's policy, they need to give you the how, not the what. But those people, this echelon, they became the ones who can decide also the what. They can decide the policy. And the government, they can only basically recommend. Now, this happened, it's not like a conspiracy theory or anything, or maybe an observation of myself, or something like that. There's actually a decision of the Attorney General of the government of Israel, a person called Attorney Meni Mazuz. He was a Supreme Court judge later. He resigned, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago. The top bureaucracy of the legal system in Israel. And in 2004, which was the Ariel Sharon government, it's not considered it's the same government that did the disengagement from Gaza. So it's not like a crazy right wing, Likud government, or as people want to, sometimes say it's not like the fascists. Okay, it's the disengagement government. And they had the labor on this government was a white government.
It was the government that handed over Gaza to Hamas and Fatah at the time.
Right.
They pulled out
and it was a pretty
10,000 plus
consensus.
Jewish people because they were Jewish from the Gaza Strip.
Central left government, very consensus. No, it's not controversial in any way. I mean, except for the disengagement that was controversial to the right wingers, not to the left. So under this government, their attorney general, which in Israel has a status that's he's very, very atzmai, he's very, very independent. The attorney general, he's basically, it's for a different podcast altogether. Yeah. But the way the system is built, when we talk about attorney general in Israel, it's not only like the head of the prosecution and all that. He's like the legal advisor of the executive branch. And basically the way to understand it, he's like the representative of the courts inside the executive branch. And then he gives he doesn't only advise, he gives like the executive branch, which is important to understand how this happened. So he gives his instructions to the executive branch, and these instructions they're obligated to follow. He's considered like the representative of the rule of law. So if he instructs something, basically it's almost like law. Sometimes it's even more than law. Okay, because the courts will treat this very seriously. Sometimes even more than the actual laws passed by the Knesset. So this guy, Meni Mazuz, Attorney General, or maybe even better to say the representative of the judiciary inside the executive branch. So he has this procedure of how to make a decision about establishing new settlements. I translate this as freely from and he's giving the government instructions how the government, the elected government, needs to think about deciding these kinds of decisions. What kind of considerations you have to take, what you need to check, what you need to look at, what you need to think about, all these issues. None of them have to do with, a strategic policy of, of Jewish settlements. It has to do with I'll try just to translate as I go, has to do with professional, avodat mate, which is professional, professional work, thinking about everything with all the professional people involved, has to take in account all these different aspects of establishing a new yishuv, including maybe other options. Instead of establishing a new settlement, think about, the environment, have to think about demography, they have to think about all these issues.
Security.
So they don't have to think about security.
No.
Doesn't care about that.
Why?
No, he cares about he cares about the environment.
It seems like security would be the number one issue if it's going to put people at risk, or there's some sort of
No,
need.
they don't care. They don't do with that. They deal with that has to do with national policy, security. That's like the government's issue. They deal with stuff that have to do with environmentalism. Okay,
There's everything but
with
security.
everything but security. Exactly. Everything. As I
Everything
said before, everything that you ask yourself when you come to the stage of discussing on how. Okay, we want to have a new settlement in the Golan Heights. Okay, we accept that. Now, these professionals can come in and say, listen, if you go on this specific location, there's a very serious environmentalist problem because there's a unique kind of a flower grows there or something like that, or a unique kind
These aren't how to dig a well in the desert. That's not the issue. That we can work out. But if there's a flower, that could be enough.
Yeah, so they come. So I say, they can say, okay, not here. Let's do it there. That would be okay. But instead, it's upside down. So these people, that's the only things you need to think about now. And now these people, there's unelected officials sitting in all these government, bureaucracy dealing with the environment, with population planning, issues like that, and they get posek acharon on this issue. Now it gets even worse because what Meni Mazuz says, what the Attorney General says, he says that not only that they need to take into consideration all of these issues, when the government wants to decide on establishing a new settlement, the government decision needs to be worded. It needs to be written only like in a general, principled manner. It cannot be specific. The government can't say we want to do 1, 2, 3, 4. They can say we want to establish, a settlement in a specific area. We kind of like really want to. Has to be like general nisuach. Has to be written carefully in a way that does not deny the professional. How to say shikul dat? Shikul dat is
Analysis.
Yeah, analysis or decision making, the professional decision making
analysis
of the bureaucracy. Okay, there's a lot of words here for bureaucracy. Planning institutions and et cetera, et cetera. So the government cannot even override those institutions when they want to establish a new settlement. They only need to write something like very general. Okay, they cannot say, okay, we know there's these flowers and these mice, and we want to build a settlement anyhow. No, you cannot say that. You could say we want in general something to happen, and then these guys need to go to work. Okay, and more than that, I'm reading out of those instructions of Meni Mazuz. Okay, I'm not making anything up. More than that, when the government publishes this kind of decision, it cannot have any straightforward instructions as far as like where the settlement will be, how big it will be. They cannot say this as a instruction. In these issues, and I'm reading, the government can only express its policy, but it cannot decide instead of the official authority. Okay? So you get this, like the whole pyramid is upside down. The government cannot decide instead of the official authority. Who is the authority? It's not the government. Okay? It's these unelected officials, the planning authorities, the environmentalists. There's all these issues. It's very complex. I'm sure you have experts that can dig into all these layers of bureaucracy that are involved. But what happens is that the government is not the one who gets to decide.
It's very interesting. The language says the government is entitled to express its policy, but not decide in place of this reshuta muskama.
Reshuta musmechet. It's the authority.
Google translates it as competent authority. It's pretty insulting to the government. Although maybe it's pretty accurate. I don't know. But anyway, it depends who the elected officials are. Yeah. But
right,
that's a clear instruction from the Attorney General saying the government is not entitled to express its policy. I mean, that's just wild. It's like basically the AG is saying it's not on par with the government. It's like you're saying, it's flipped upside down. The power is in the hands of the quote unquote competent authority.
Exactly. It's like that. It's not a government policy issue anymore. You know, when the government makes these החלטות ממשלה, government decisions about establishing a issue, they always refer to this instruction of the many mazuz. They say, it always says, they, על פי נוהל קבלת החלטה בנושא הקמת יישובים
Right, right.
חדשים.
In accordance with the direct of Attorney General number 1.1800.
Yeah. So when the government wants to establish a new settlement, so who writes the government decision? The government's legal consultant,
Legal
right?
staff,
Right?
which
The
the
legal
AG is
staff.
saying.
So they put this
That is the
in.
Attorney General, right? That's their office,
Yeah,
right?
it's his guys. It's not him, but it's
Everything's
his
in
guys.
accordance with the experts that are part of the bureau, the established
Yeah, so
bureaucracy.
they write these decisions because you need a legal expert to write this, and then they put this, okay, this will be only accordance to this. Now, most of the people in government, they have no idea what this means. They never looked it up. Okay, you says Hanchayat,
That's why
whatever.
you're giving them a Danachav Schuza. You're judging them a good eye. They're sitting there with those pictures with all their politicians. We've accomplished something, and really, it may not be as much of an accomplishment as they're thinking it is. That's basically
Right. Right. Some of them do. Some of them understand, but it's like a self-destruction mechanism inside the text, and they're not even aware of it. And then now what happens is, if you want to have the new settlement, so you have to have there's one government decision where you say the general idea we want to have, and then there's several years of planning institutions have to give in their feedback. Then there has to be a second government decision. Usually it's a different government already. And then there's another set of these, plannings and paperwork and it never ends. Supposedly there's like a system that at the end of it, you could maybe establish a new settlement. The fact on the ground is it's been 30 years and it never happened. Okay. It just never happens. And they can continue doing these government decisions, some of them over and over again in the same places. The Arad thing, I think there was 5 different government decisions on this Arad area. Because every government, they want to say, we're doing this. We're pro settlements. We want to have new settlements. So they do these government, meetings. Sometimes they do these government, sessions in the field. Like they will go to Sde Boker in the Negev, and then they'll decide ceremoniously building another 20 Shuvim in the Negev. And it's a decision that's been made maybe 5 times before already, and nothing is happening. And they had one in the Ramat Golan. And this week, the government was in Kiryat Shmona, and they didn't deal about the new settlements, but they did all these,
Basically, we need to ask our producers for some theme songs over here. While you're talking, there's going to be bum bum ba da 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 dum bum.
Right,
bum.
exactly. That's it. It really is it. It really is it. So that's what's happening. Now, these guys on the, these unofficial elects, the bureaucracies.
So one second,
a lot of times they tend to be.
I want to deep dive on that a little bit, if we can. So I don't think I've ever heard of any communities starting within, a few years, okay, a new development as part of a moshav, a town or a city or a village, like you say, that's one thing. But to start we're talking about founding a new community in very important strategic locations. I don't think I've ever heard of anything less than 10 years. Have you? Have you heard of any communities being founded actually like putting a shovel in the ground? I'm not talking about when settlers will go and just, camp out in a tractor
10
trailer.
years, maybe Yosh. And
I'm not talking about Yosh.
It's been 30 years. There was no new settlement in the 48 boundaries of the old Israel. It just doesn't happen. Now, 10 years could be maybe a expansion of the existing place. It takes a long time. Even this kind of stuff. The place where I live, it's called Kfar Etamim. This is it's based on like a old kibbutz. The kibbutz was established in the 80s. It didn't go well for them. It was like a little bit too late in the 80s to do new kibbutzim stuff. They collapsed. And then 20 or 15 years ago, they said, okay, let's turn this into a different community. It's called Yishuv Kihilati. It's not collective. It's just like more privately owned. It's a different thing. And then we lived in the beginning on this old kibbutz campus, and then we had planning and discussions of having a wider new neighborhood with new houses. That took almost 10 years. A place that already exists and already has planning and zoning and everything, and you just want to, extend. That could take 10 years easily. Okay, so that's true. There's one exception for what I said about those new Ishuvim. There's only one place. It's called Chiran. You mentioned it also when we talked. It's also like eastern Negev area, not too far from Arad actually. That's the one settlement that was established in the last 25 years, and they finished their last stages a few years ago. But now starting like the actual Ishuv, and they had this temporary community with the Caravanim, all that. They had that also for a long time. The only reason why this happened is because they passed the crucial stages of land allocation before the Attorney General instruction was final. Because his decision became part of what's called the Tochnit Mit'ar Artzit. It's like the national planning rationale for Israel, like the whole planning idea. So it's in the planning already. So they they finished their crucial stages before the Attorney General's instruction became part of the planning issue. This is too much details for most people, but
Yeah.
they kind of made it. It's like a miracle, basically.
But before this new statute or whatever, what do you call it? A statute? What is this from the AG?
Probably it's like a decision, instruction. It's
Decision?
called Hanchaya in Hebrew. Hanchaya.
What?
It's called Hanchaya, so maybe it's like an instruction or
Before the attorney general passed that, was it much quicker?
yeah, yeah.
How long did it take to start a new community or to even add on to the communities?
Yeah, no, adding on is different. It has nothing to do
Different
with that.
procedure.
It
Okay, so
it
but
was
how
possible
how long was it to start?
it was possible to start new Yeshuvim, but also, this Hiran place that they kind of managed to go through some crucial stages before the Attorney General. They broke land, like broke ground, you say,
Yep.
I don't know, like 2 or 3 years ago. It's been 20 years.
Wow.
Because the institutions they can drive you crazy like forever because
So
there's
they
always
cause do you
more.
think it's intentional? I mean, there is an aspect of this, which is that you don't want people just, one government comes and then passes legislation and the other one comes and then uproots it or passes it in a different location. You have all sorts of pendulum swinging. Like starting a community should be something that's, part of a larger master plan, right? Like if you have a map and you need to think strategically and every new government that comes in starts a giant city with major approvals up north or down south, and then real estate collapses in the central Israel. I'm just using that as it's usually the opposite, but that would create a tremendous amount of volatility in the market. It would totally be destabilizing the banks and the mortgage industries, and so is there an aspect? Is there an upside to this, or is it
Yeah, so
completely?
as I said, I tried to say this in the beginning of this conversation, is that no one's against the professional planning of settlements. It's a serious issue. If you establish a settlement or a town or a city, it's going to stay there forever, hopefully. It's not something you can cancel. It's not that easy. So you should treat this seriously, professionally. These processes take a long time naturally, and some of it should. So you can't get like a situation every government decides is just to build towns and then things fly over the place. It's not going to happen. You need to have professionals dealing with how to put forward to implement government policy. That's why we have professionals. And
And what
also
about the
government officials, they're not the crazy maniacs. They're not going to just go around and build settlements like all over the place. It's not a
understood?
computer game.
What about the security component? In other words, you mentioned that the government is primarily in charge of the security, but if you ask any general, how do we protect the border? Do we protect it with thousands of soldiers, or is it preferable to have civilians? And most generals will say that it's very difficult to protect a border where you don't have people living there.
Right.
So here you have a case where Hezbollah for over a decade has been with the other Iranian proxies has been threatening a major war, which we've seen almost actualize. Miraculously, they didn't attack in the north, but their plan was very well publicized by them to the world that they, were planning to march to Haifa from Kiryat Shmona and other places in a major, major attack that would have taken over. Is there any coordination between putting large metropolises up north to help protect the northern border as opposed to just not allowing the development up there? And we have all these new communities also in the south. Same thing applies to where the new communities are approved by the government, but this professional institution, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, kicks the can down the road and prevents it from moving forward. What is the, is there any aspect of security that could override that?
So theoretically, yeah, but no, they can't establish legally in the boundaries of the state of Israel communities as a like a security need. You can't say, okay, that's the bureaucracy is not working. So let's have like the Ministry of Defense establish communities the way they establish army
No, but
bases.
in conjunction with security prerogative, that there should be a goal to develop the border
You're right. You're
communities.
right. You're right. Like, and as far as like the idea, but just the way the system is built, it can't happen. Why the government wants to establish these communities? It's always security, national interest. Some of it has to do with the struggle with the Bedouins who take over land and Arabs in the Galilee and stuff like that. There's issues like inner issues, and some of it has to do with border security. You want to have more people on the borders. It strengthens the borders. If the people living in the settlements also have their own weapons, so they can also protect themselves, at least to some extent, right? If taking over a kibbutz and the northern border is not that easy, it's important. If you delay the Hezbollah for another 5 or 6 hours, it makes a lot of difference. That was like the classic Zionist, Israeli policy. The Shuvim were compounds, military compounds. They had bunkers, they had, weaponry. That was the idea. So yeah, so definitely that's what we need. We need these people.
Well,
And
this
we
is
need
fascinating. So tell me,
also,
what do you?
where there's agriculture, where there's people, where there's, livestock, there's less trespassing the border. It's harder for people to come in because somebody will notice. Somebody wakes up in the morning and sees somebody who's walking through his field, he will notice. It's way more efficient than having, just like a army unit doing the patrol on the fence, right? It's really
Akiva,
crucial.
tell us, do you think that post October 7th that this bureaucracy, this that's a upside down world where the unelected officials are actually deciding and running the development process of new communities. Do you think that that's changed at all, given the fact that there are such threats and the front line is almost everywhere now, and so it only security wise would help to have more communities in the peripheral? And also, what would you say to the people in the peripheral who might feel a little bit like they moved out there with a promise of developing the border communities, and now they're just like yourself, it's to bring it home, so to speak, where you feel a little bit left alone by the government and this bureaucracy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm sad to say that I don't think anything is changing. I mean, not enough. The only thing that's changing is maybe public awareness, because these settlements, especially in the north, they suffered a severe blow, and then now these things that maybe we could have ignored, they become like very obvious. We see them. These places, they're having very difficult time, and we can see. And the fact that the government is clashing with this bureaucracy over this issue is important because it brings it forward. But nothing changed. Actually, the system is the same system. It's built the same way. It's designed in the same way. It's very difficult to make changes in the system, even just like to move people around to change. In the United States, the executive branch, they have a lot of flexibility as far as appointments. In Israel, there's even way less flexibility in appointments to key positions. That is very difficult. So, yeah, I'm like kind of pessimistic on this issue.
You are.
The only thing that's good is that there's a public awareness. That's good. That's important. And as I say always on my own podcast, also, you can talk about these policy issues all the time, and a lot of times it's very frustrating that there's issues like this that are supposed to be. Some issues are like controversial. Okay, I get it. Okay, like the judicial reform. Okay, I get it. People are against. I can understand. I can argue, whatever, but I can get it. There's some issues that you just cannot understand, like this. Like, why not? Okay, why not? If the government has like a crazy idea of establishing, a settlement in some place that doesn't make any sense, okay, that's okay. So these professionals should step up and say, okay, listen, guys, let's do this on the other hill. The other hill is better. Okay, I get it, but it's not the issue, right? It's not the issue. The issue is like total lack of basically losing the basic Zionism here. Jews living in the state of Israel and protecting it and defending it and making it stronger. That's the issue. And what I say a lot of times in my podcast about this is that, our job is to make awareness. The public needs to be aware. We need people to know. what's happening. And public opinion in a democracy matters. It takes time, especially when you're talking about issues dealing with bureaucracy and unelected officials. They're less sensitive to public opinion as as opposed to politicians, obviously. But it matters and it builds up, and a change will happen. That's why I'm optimistic. Okay.
Are there any organizations that, like in the Yehuda Shomron, you have a lot of land activism, there are organizations like Regavim and other organizations, but are there any organizations dealing with this specifically?
Yeah, so there are some. It's less than Yehuda Shomron because the awareness of this issue in the old Israel, so-called, is newer. The Gavim also operate here
They
in
do.
in the Negev Galil. There are some organizations. I don't have their names in the tip of my mind because they're new and they're like just starting out. They're a lot of times they're like local like people from the Galil. So they have this organization. They're starting to push forward these issues. Also policy making, also public awareness. They're doing that. Some in the Negev too. A lot of the local the municipalities in these areas, they're very much aware of this. Okay, they know about this, and we didn't talk about a lot. There's a lot of other issues.
Yeah.
We just like touched like the tip of the iceberg here, but they have a lot of fights with the bureaucracy all the time. So they're very much aware. They're very much pushing forward. They know what needs to be done. But as I said, we're talking about different layers of the executive branch. So the elected officials, local or national, they know what's going on. They know what the problems are. The problem is the unelected officials, and that's what needs to change.
Tell us your predictions here. I know you're not a prophet, but we have a lot of approvals. I think 6 new communities in the Negev. Do you think that it's 6, right?
It depends how you count. I stop trying to. There's so
Okay.
many.
So I guess that answers the question before I even
You
could
can
ask.
count to 15 at some point. And
Well, do you think that we're going to see a large portion of these fulfilled and actually break ground and get established and grow?
I think so, because I'm even though I'm pessimistic as far as being realistic, I am optimistic as far as Zionism and the state of Israel. So I think so because also you see consecutive governments, all the governments in this 25 or 30-year period, they all want this. There's no argument. It's only like a stupid bureaucratic problem that has to be solved, and maybe it has to be, maybe it has to become the focus of the government at some point. Because what happens is that it's never the most important issue. There's always more important stuff. There's always wars. There's always Gaza. There's always Iran. There's always issues. Always Yehuda Shomron, which is more complicated and more involves national policy making and the United States, whatever that. There's always more important and more issues that take energy from a government. And maybe at some point, some government will say, "Okay, guys, this is what we do. This is our main policy issue," and then they
Kiva,
can push this forward. They can make this happen. It's not impossible.
who do you think is against moving things forward? I mean, would you? I mean, okay, let's say it a different way. Even though there are no new communities or very few new communities that have sprung up in the Negev, for example, there has been tremendous booms in Beersheba, in Sderot, Netivot. These are cities. These are proper, tens of thousands. What, 100,000? I mean, they're giant cities now. Is there push? Are they enjoying or the developers, I should say? No one's enjoying paying a 30-year mortgage. Are the developers part of this puzzle? Are they part of this bureaucracy? Is that
No, I don't think so, because when we're talking about having another, like 100 families on the Egyptian border, it's not going to affect development in Beersheba. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, the village side, which is tremendously important. You don't need a lot of people to make a big difference. We're talking about that. So it's not going to, I don't think there's you're talking about something like some kind of conflict of interest or some
well, in
kind
the
of,
United States, there's
maybe, it's
lobbying.
people like behind the
There's
scenes
a lot of
doing-
lobbying in the United States where construction versus environmentalists, and you have a healthy clash between two different groups that might have differing opinions on steering the country or its policy, etc. And I can't imagine that someone who's building apartment buildings would want to see a house here and there, like even if it's just a few hundred. Like those are, and not just that, but it takes a lot of effort to get in with a municipality, with a city, to make the connections, to get them to say, yes, we want your company to build 1,000 new units that we have 10,000 approvals for. I mean, scratching the surface here, but you
Yeah,
know,
I don't think this is
it
the
sounds
issue.
like this bureaucracy is just standing by on their own, and I just it seems senseless. So I'm just trying to figure out like
Yeah,
who might be the opposing force here that's keeping it going.
you're saying it will make more sense if it was corruption, not just bureaucracy.
Well, I'm not saying corruption. No. Definitely not advocating for corruption, but I'm just, tell us what is there anyone that's in favor of this bureaucracy besides the bureaucracy itself because they
So
need it?
I don't know. I don't have like any concrete knowledge on that. That's not what I see. That's not what I feel, though. I mean, there's developers that will develop also these small communities. It's good for them too. There's always work for everybody. There's enough people to live everywhere. Also, these small communities, like they tend to strengthen the metropolitan, right? So Beersheba, everybody goes to Beersheba from around the area. So even if you have another 100, 200 families in Arad area, it's good for Beersheba. They're going to go to their hospitals, go to the university. They're going to buy in Beersheba, so they're not going to pay taxes to Beersheba, but they are still part of the
Short term, but long term,
metropolitan.
some
So
of these
I
communities
don't
might
think
grow.
there's like an interest issue
Look at
here,
Efrat. Efrat didn't start out with 10,000 units.
right?
And Efrat is still growing. Do these larger cities become motivated to grow their own cities because of the infrastructure and the power that's concentrated in one area, as opposed to opening the door for other communities to start, grow, and flourish?
So I don't think that's a problem. I just don't.
So you think it's the idiocy of bureaucracy. It's a classic bureaucratic
It's
nightmare where the
bureaucracy. It's not
bureaucracy
only
feeds
idiocy. It's
itself because they hold a
bureaucracy.
tremendous amount of power.
And it's also the bureaucracy that became very progressive, very environmentalist. We did not discuss at all the pro-Arab sentiment in the bureaucracy that we need to build for Arabs and not for Jews. We're building enough. Arabs are left out. There's this issue of like social justice kind of issue, racial theory issue. There's all these
Okay, good.
everything that's like underneath the umbrella, the progressive umbrella, is in.
Good. I think we'll leave it there for our next conversation. That's a great place to end. Whet the appetite of our friends who are tuning in, and anything else you want to share with us. How can people who are inspired by this to get involved? Like, how would you direct them?
Yeah. So first of all, we're talking about public opinion and awareness. So just like read about this, study about this.
Share the podcast. Okay. Yeah.
I can listen to me.
I got to try this
Self
new feature.
promotion, self promotion here. Yeah. So that's important, and the more people are invested in this and interested in this, I'm serious. Other people are deal with this, not only me. And the more people know about this and get interested and talk about it and discuss it, and we'll make a difference. That's the way it works. It needs to be important enough for all of us. That's the only way it works. They say democracy dies in darkness. That's what they say, right? So this the same here. Bad things happen in darkness. That's the whole issue.
Yeah.
So that's our job, as journalists. We can't do much more than that. That's what we do.
Great. Akiva Bigman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We
It's been
look
a
forward
pleasure.
to continuing the discussion, hopefully in future weeks. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Bye-bye.
At Tribe Journal, we tell the untold. You can find more great content like this at tribejournal.org. Thanks for being with us.